Hello, welcome to the video notes for lesson 3-4, and this is all about function notation. Alright, so our targets for this lesson are, we actually have more than one this time. I can use function notation to represent functions, and then I can, given the domain of a function, determine the range of the function. So there are two new words for our vocabulary. We have domain and we have range. And this is going to be brought up again in this video, but domain is basically a fancy way of saying X, or a fancy way of saying input. And the range is a fancy way of saying Y, or output. Okay, you'll remember from earlier in this topic, a function is a rule for taking each input value and producing exactly one output value. Alright, so that defines if something is a function. Now, let's take a look at some function notation. So, when we see a function, sometimes it'll be a regular equation that says y equals 3x minus 7. But a lot of times you're going to see this new notation where it looks like this. This is not two different variables, f and x, being multiplied. This is telling us that we're dealing with a function. And the way you read it is f of x. This is not two variables. This is a function. F of x equals 3x minus 7. G of x equals x squared minus 9. H of x equals the absolute value of 2x plus 8. Alright? That's how you read it. Now, when we evaluate a function, we'll be given the function, and then we'll be told what values we're going to substitute in. So essentially it's kind of like our ESS strategy for doing the check or for evaluating our solution. But since it's not an equation, well it is, but I think it's more appropriate to call it FSS, which stands for function substitute solve. And the original function is g of x equals negative x plus 5. So the first one we're going to do is when we have g of 0. So we substitute 0 in for our x value. Now there can't be a negative 0, so it's just 0 plus 5. And 0 plus 5 is just simply 5. So if our input is 0, our output is 5. In other words, we can write this as like a point. The point would be 0, comma 5. Remember, with functions, we see them a lot in graphs. The next one, when we have g of 7, why don't I do this, or negative 7, excuse me. I'll do this in a different color. So, function substitute solve, rewrite the original function. Substitute your value in for your input. Now, we have negative 7 for x, so it's a negative negative. Remember, negative negative means positive. So we end up with positive 7 plus 5. Or, when we have an input of negative 7, our output is 12. So write it as a point. Negative 7, comma 12. Okay, so our answer for the first one is this. Our answer for the second one is this. Okay, for an extra point on your scoreboard, why don't you see what happens when you have g of positive 7? And solve it and give the answer. And if anybody can share that in math, I'll give you a point for that. Okay, now we have another example of this below. Given f of x equals 8x, find f of negative 3 and f of 10. So again, function, substitute, solve. Rewrite the original function, f of x equals 8x. Substitute your value in for your input. So negative 3 is our input. What then is our output? When our input is negative 3, our output is negative 24. Let me scooch that up a little bit. So write it as a point, negative 3, comma, negative 24. So either of these bottom two is the appropriate way to answer this problem. Either f of negative 3 equals negative 24, or negative 3, negative 24. All right, one more time. This time our f of x is going to be 10. So we substitute our input of 10. And then we get, when we have f of 10, we have 80. Or the point 10, comma 80. There is your final answer. How about one more, just for fun? If anybody can do f of 1/4, I will award you a point on your scoreboard. Alright, so that was page 19. Let's go ahead and take a look at page 20, which is going to be about the domain and range. So input and output values of functions are sometimes referred to as domain and range. Domain is the input values, or x. Range is the output values, or y. So you have this table here that kind of separates them and shows you. Now your copy is in black and white, so why don't you go ahead and draw a nice straight line down the middle to separate these two, so you can tell range is output, is f of x, is y. These things are all the same thing. Over here on the left side, domain, input, x or x. These are all basically the same thing. Okay, so our first example, state the domain and range of the function represented in the table. So this is how you do it. So the domain is, so you can do an arrow or do a semicolon, or colon, excuse me. And then you do x is equal to, then we do curly bracket or mustache, and then we write our values, and we go from least to greatest. So negative 2, comma, negative 1, comma, 0, comma, 1, comma, 2. For the range, make sure when you do the range or the domain that you write the appropriate heading after your arrow or after your colon. So the range is f of x, that's my heading this time, equals curly bracket. Now put your numbers in order. 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Now earlier in this topic, when we talked about naming a set or naming a function, we would name them by their set of ordered pairs or their coordinates. Okay, and we would list all these and we put them in parentheses and separate that by commas. This time, we are naming just the input values as our domain, and then our output values as our range. So we're grouping them vertically, at least for this example, to name what the domain is and what the range is. Alright? So try not to mix those things up. A lot of times we'll see students that will try to put these in parentheses and all that. That's not what domain and range is doing. Domain is separating the x and the y, or the x and the f of x. Okay? Alright, so we have one more example. This time the table is not filled in completely, so you are expected to extend the table and substitute your value in for your input, or for your x, and discover what our h of x values are. So we have negative 2 to the second power minus 9. Well, negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. Positive 4 minus 9 is negative 5. Then we have negative 1 squared, which is 1 minus 9, negative 8. Then we have 0 squared minus 9, negative 9. So go ahead and finish the table. Then I want you to state the domain and the range on your own. I will call on different people in math to share their results, and if I get correct answers, we'll get a couple more points on the scoreboard. So it looks like we've got a few different ways for you to earn points on your scoreboard. If anything that we did in this video is confusing, or if you have any questions, come and see me, or ask a friend or a parent for help. Good luck, and we'll see you in math.